Well, the topic of my article is investigating to see how new categories are formed for organizations. And I look at this within the software industry. I'm interested in this because categories and organizational identity in general can be really important for organizations. So like people, organizations can have an identity. So I am a woman and I might have a certain ethnic identity, so I'm a Greek woman, and that'll affect how other people view me and maybe some of the things I choose to do. So organizations are similar that way, and a big piece of the identity of an organization is what I call what category it belongs to. So things get a little bit more hairy when categories aren't that well known and when they're just being formed. And this is especially an issue in the software industry, where there's a lot of entrepreneurial activity, a lot of new innovations, a lot of novelty, and entrepreneurs will be trying to decide if they want to start to create a new type of category, a new type of business, or if they want to join an existing category. And so there's a tension between trying to fit in to what everyone already knows and then trying to be different enough so that the organization you're trying to sell to actually wants to purchase your goods. And this is part of the title of my paper, Fitting In or Starting New. So do you want to fit into the existing category structure, or do you want to try to carve out a new type of category for whatever your organization produces? The main objective of my study is to look at when a new category is created, how much of that is because there's a new technology, so we might think that that's kind of the basic fundamentals of novelty. So that's one view, and that's a very well accepted view. And what I try to look at in the paper is how much of the social structure in terms of the category structure affects whether or not something is seen as new. And so the way I did that was I tried to separate technical novelty from how organizations position themselves on the market. Now, why this is important relates back a little bit to what I was talking about, because whether or not organizations claim to be something that's very new or claim to be part of an existing category can have real implications in terms of whether they can sell things, who wants to buy their goods, whether they even get ignored. And so a lot of times what you'll see is that an entrepreneur will come up with something that's very new, and they'll describe why it's so new and why it's different and why it should be appealing in very technical terms. I think in general, even researchers have tended to look for these technical explanations to describe how novelty gets inserted into the world. So when we think of an invention that changes everything, we think of it a lot of times in these technical terms. What I show in the study is that it's partly technical, like new technologies that create novelty, but it's also partly how existing categories are viewed by people who are viewing these. So the people might be customers, or they might be investors, venture capitalists, or anyone who's interested in this type of environment. So the way I study this is that I separate this technology and categories on the market in two different, what I call planes, and I call them knowledge space and market space. And you would think that they're related, and indeed I show that they are, but it really helps when you're researching a topic to try to separate these from each other, because then you can see what's caused by knowledge, what's caused by the market, and if there's an interaction. So what I did was I created a knowledge space which was based on the patenting behavior of organizations. When an organization creates a patent, what they're trying to do, what they have to do, what they're regulated to do, is create some kind of new piece of knowledge that is an invention that no one else has done before, that is novel and can be described very cleanly and is tractable. So we have this side of knowledge space where that may or may not map very neatly onto what that organization is doing in the market. So what I was able to do by separating knowledge space and market space is create an independent measure of technical novelty. And then I could say, oh, does that actually lead to novelty on the market? Well, the main finding from the study is that there's a relationship between new knowledge and novel categories. So new knowledge is likely to create a new category in the context where existing categories are very well defined. But that does not carry over to contexts where existing categories are not very well defined. So what that would mean to a manager or an entrepreneur would be that if you have a very novel invention and your target is to create a new category, a new class of goods, and sort of pioneer an entirely new thing, that just that novelty of the invention is not enough to know that you can necessarily make it. So what a lot of managers and entrepreneurs don't do is to take into account the market context. And this is what I'm bringing squarely into the picture. So people tend to assume that a new invention will lead to a new category, and if they just broadcast it enough and get enough funding, that'll be fine. And this is part of what I said before, was that they'll talk about their novelty in terms of the technical invention. They talk about it in terms of knowledge base, and they don't talk about it in terms of market space. So what managers need to do is actually look to see, well, what is the market around me like? Is the category I'm in already, is that very well defined? What I mean by well defined is that each category is very well bounded, that everyone agrees that these organizations are in and these organizations are out. When you think of something like a bank, that's a very highly regulated category. The government regulates it. You have to follow certain rules to be called a bank, and if you're not that type of bank, or if you don't follow those rules, you're not a bank. But there's other categories, and these especially rise in the software industry. A very notable one is e-business. So e-business was a really important category, and everyone was saying that they were an e-business. But when it came down to it, if you look at these businesses, the only thing they had to be was actually electronic and be a business. And even then, sometimes that was violated. I remember I was working in Washington, D.C., and there was a store called patio.com, but it was a store. So it wasn't even electronic, right? It was bricks and mortar. So in order to create a new category, not only do you have to have some kind of reason for the novelty, and the reason we can think of as the new knowledge, but you also have to have something in the social space to compare this new category against. People tend to only look at knowledge. They're 100%, well, this is a new novel invention, and 0% to market construction. And what they need to do is bring that back into the picture, and this is why I'm focusing so heavily on it. So basically, what people need to do is take both into account, that there's an interaction that goes on. And what people have historically done is really just try to focus on one. And so I'm trying to bring the market construction back into the picture with my research.